Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the United Nations International Labor Organization doing to promote decent work environments and to help workers in many areas of the world? My guest today is an expert on the ILO and these issues. My guest today is Mr. Kevin Cassidy. Kevin Cassidy is the Senior Communications and External Relations Officer at the International Labor Organization's Office for the United Nations. Kevin Cassidy, welcome to today's Global Connections Television.
Thank you, Bill.
I appreciate you being with me today. You probably have the dubious honor of being the most frequent guest on this program. One reason because you always have something interesting to say, but secondly because the ILO is involved in doing a lot of important work and dealing with a lot of really knotty, nitty-gritty issues. And so let's get into some of them. Before we do, let's talk a little bit about the ILO. When was it formed? Why was it formed?
Bill, thanks very much. And the ILO has an important role in the world of work. It's not only just about the protection of workers, but it's also about the promotion of sustainable enterprises. Because if you don't have jobs, enterprises, you don't have employment opportunities. And if you don't have good workers, you don't have good productivity. So we have a symbiotic relationship with both the workers and employers. And as such, the ILO is comprised of governments, workers, and employers working together. And we came into being, although I think the essence of the ILO has been around for a long time. How do you create jobs? How do you create business? How do you create economic growth and equitable growth? So the ILO came into being at the end of World War I, and it was brought into being alongside the League of Nations, the precursor to the UN. So whereas the UN is meant to look at peace and security issues, they realized that peace and security can't take hold until you have social justice. So the ILO was brought into being alongside that. And we are a normative agency, which means we set international standards. We are a technical agency, which means that we do research and collect statistics to provide the information that people need to do the analysis of work. We are a technical advice agency that works with governments in providing them with what policies work and what stages of economic development. But we also reach out and develop capacity at the national level with workers and employers organizations. So the ILO is an important part of the United Nations system, and that's active in every part of the world today.
Mm-hmm. And as I recall, you were the third oldest of the specialized agencies. I think the Universal Postal Union, the International Telecommunications Union, came along before you did, but you came along in 1919. But you are dealing with some very important topics. Let's talk a little bit about the underpinnings. Do you have 4 or 5 basic principles that are the, you might say, the driving rules of the road or the goals of the International Labor Organization?
Right. So what we're referring to today is decent work. Now, the ILO is focused on providing quality employment for people. And with that, you have a sort of 3 pillars that support the roof of decent work. So the first pillar is international standards and norms. What are the hours of work? What are the conditions of work? How do we treat workers who are looking for work in places around the world? How do we provide protection for vulnerable workers such as domestic workers? So these international standards are developed through negotiation between workers and employers and governments, of course. And those standards set the framework for how work is viewed today and how we judge work and sets the baseline for that. The second pillar of the decent work agenda is social dialogue. As you can imagine, in the workplace, it's important to have discussions with the employers and with the workers to ensure that everybody understands what the problems are, how we can fix that, and how we work together. Social dialogue takes place at the factory level when you have workers and employers discussing better ways of production. It's not just about salaries, it's about how do you improve production, how do you increase profits, how do you reduce defect rates. So it's in the interest of both workers and employers to have that dialogue. The third pillar of decent work is social protection. Some people understand it as social security. Others see it as, for example, conditional cash transfers for poor families who have to make that very delicate decision about, do I send my children to school or do I send them out to work because the family doesn't have enough income in order to put food on the table. So it's up to the governments in order to provide those social protection initiatives to help people. So social protection is also retraining of workers if you lose your job, no fault of your own because of technological advancements, or in old age, do you have a pension to sustain you? So social protection runs the sort of life cycle. And then you also have employment promotion. That's a very, very important part of the ILO's work. So we have different conditions today, for example, about how do we make that transition from high carbon to low carbon economies. We look at climate change. We look at how technology has changed the way we work, the future of work. So it's really important to kind of to sort of take into account that aspect of how the world of work is developing.
Mm-hmm. How do we make that change from high carbon to low carbon? Because that really is the undergirding problem with a large part of, in fact, it fuels a large number of the problems we have in this world today, especially with climate change and that type of thing. But how can we make that? And I know the profit motive is in there. We see the fossil fuel industry is certainly not willing to give up making profits off of what they have of oil, gas, coal, although coal is a dying industry, has been dying for years now. But how can we do that more quickly and more efficiently?
Sure. The analysis is being done by countless scientists around the world and looking at how the climate changes. And this is not just about more snow or more rain, but it's about how the circulation patterns of the ocean work, because that's obviously going to support life in the oceans, about how we're polluting the oceans or what we're putting into the atmosphere. There will be winners, there will be losers, there's no doubt about that. But technology has always come up with solutions. We've seen that throughout the centuries. It's something that we have to negotiate with countries around the world. It does no good to reduce our carbon footprint if other neighbors are increasing theirs. But it's more than that. It's also looking at, for example, built architecture. So you go to sort of very developed cities and you will see buildings that could benefit from having double pane glass so that it doesn't leak energy to the outside. It's looking at how do we use the natural resources. So if rainwater is coming, can we use that to flush toilets? Can we use that to water the lawn instead of taking potable water that we need for drinking and for cooking? And so it's finding access to natural resources that will be able to help us move to that next level of work as well too. How do we reduce water usage for cotton fields? How do we put in new technological advancements to ensure that we have enough food for people? So it's not just about a simple issue, but it can impact. So maybe one other sort of example to drill down a bit is that there will be an oceans conference coming up very soon. And we've had a discussion with the Law of the Sea group as well too. And one of the ideas that we've put on the table is about the ocean as a workplace. Because there are many communities around the world that rely upon fisheries, that rely upon the ocean for livelihoods, for sustenance. And when we see coral reefs dying, then we'll see fish species dying out. When we see the pollution of the ocean, we'll see sort of zero oxygen zones. And so all of these issues are important for the environment itself, but also who and what it sustains. It sustains us. It sustains the people on this earth. So it really is something that we have to look at and we have to take into account every day as we start to move forward with the new work agenda and the new climate change responses.
And we certainly have to keep the ocean alive, because if it dies, we're not far behind in all probability. You were talking earlier about the social safety net. You were talking about Social Security, unemployment insurance, things like that, talking about dialogue between workers and the businesses and the workers through collective bargaining or whatever the case might be. It seems like there's been a siege, especially an assault, especially in countries like the United States over the past several years, to cut the social net to a large degree, to reduce Social Security benefits, to not provide unemployment compensation, to reduce labor involvement in labor unions. Is that the case just in the United States, or is that a trend in other parts of the world?
Right, so we'll have to break that down to a couple of issues.
Okay.
I think the first thing is that social protection is an investment in people. If people don't have good nutrition when they're younger, when children don't have good nutrition, the brain functions are not being developed fully. If they're not provided with education, an illiterate, innumerate child will grow up to be an illiterate, innumerate adult. If you don't, in fact, look after people who have lost their job because there have been changes in industrialization to higher level industries or higher level service economy, you're not taking advantage of the knowledge base that you have in your country. So these are investments. They're not costs in that society. How to make that all work? You've rightly pointed to the fact of the dialogue and the emergence of trade unions. Now, trade unions are on the decrease around the world. What that means is that there's a lack of voice for workers. So if you're in a workplace and you are being not given the right remuneration, the right salary, and so you start to feel that you're not respected in the workplace, there's no dignity with your work, people start to switch off. They're not as productive, they're not as dedicated, they're not as loyal to the company in which they're working for. So that has an impact all around. So labor unions are not just there to ask for more money, they're there to help improve the processes, to increase productivity, but to ensure that there is a sustainable future for that. So the dialogue between the workers and employers is an essential element to ensure that we have going concerns and that there are good jobs out there that everyone can benefit from, and then hence if they have gainful employment, they'll have disposable income. Because what we've seen around the world is a lack of global demand. That's why many of the countries are now suffering a bit of a downturn. We saw that back in 2007, 2008 with the economic and financial crisis. And unfortunately, we see some of the signs right now to show that there is a slowing down in the economy. So we do need to have unions that provide the voice for people. We do need to have good ideas. We do need to make those investments in people and in industries in order to move to the next level of decent work.
Now, in September 2015, the United Nations General Assembly, the 193 countries that make up the General Assembly, came together and adopted 17 Sustainable Development Goals called the 2030 Development Agenda. What exactly is that development agenda, and how is ILO working to help achieve many of those goals?
Yeah, so the Sustainable Development Goals, as we commonly refer to here as the SDGs, is a very ambitious development agenda. It pulls together many of those key issues, such as eliminating poverty, eliminating hunger, increasing women's participation in the workforce, improving the environment, having better cities, creating opportunities for peace and justice to flourish. So all of these issues have been discussed in a collaborative and participatory manner, not just amongst the member states of the UN, but civil society organizations, academic groups, other people, practitioners on the ground who are seeing the problems firsthand, and they're relaying that back. So the 17 goals are matched by, I think it's 169 targets, and then somewhere around 210, the data that we need. So it's looking at the indicators about how we're making progress, because you need a baseline to do that. And all of these goals are actually are intertwined with one another. So for example, Goal 8 is on decent work and in economic opportunity for people. If people had decent jobs, which mean that they have a fair remuneration for themselves, which means that they have disposable income in order to buy goods and services, to provide for education for their children, to provide for a better home, to make investments themselves. What a great way to reduce poverty by giving people good jobs. If people have good jobs, also you can reduce hunger because people have the money in order to buy the food and goods that they need in order to sustain their family. By providing opportunities for women in the labor force, also elevates women's equitable participation and women's empowerment. So for us, decent work is a very, very important goal that stretches out into all of these issues, whether it's in climate change, whether it's in sustainable cities. No city can be sustainable if there aren't good jobs in there. And peace and justice, a very, very important part. And also Secretary General Gutierrez has mentioned, as he came on board as the new Secretary General this year, to talk about preventing conflict and sustaining peace. And one of the important ways to do that is by providing jobs to people, as we've seen throughout the world.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We would invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps it's an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you would like to share our programs with the general public, with your family, members of the community, whatever, please go to the website www.globalconnectionstelevision.com and feel free to download the programs free of charge at no cost. Global Connections Television is provided as a public service. Today we're taking a look at a very interesting United Nations agency, the International Labor Organization, and what the ILO is doing to help create employment, to provide decent work, to deal with many of the problems that affect both employers and laborers in the marketplace. And my guest today is an expert on all of these issues. My guest today is Mr. Kevin Cassidy, and Kevin Cassidy is the Senior Communications and External Relations Officer at the ILO's Office for the United Nations. Kevin, we were talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, and how do you bring, let's just focus on goal number 8. What are some of the specific things you're doing to bring the tripartite system, the governments to the employers and the workers together to focus on these goals, to help improve the work conditions, to create this decent employment, to create more employment opportunities so that people can reach their self-actualization and to improve their not only themselves but the society at large?
Bill, I think the work of the ILO has always contributed to the decent work agenda. It's something that has been the objective and the priority of the ILO for many, many years. The adoption of Goal 8 on decent work is an affirmation of the importance of decent work. So I'll give you 3 examples that we have. Number 1 is that for the centenary of the ILO, which we can speak about in a moment, in 2019 we'll be 100 years old. We have an enterprise initiative, and this is meant to look at particularly small and medium enterprises, which are the engine of growth for many countries around the world, especially developing and emerging economies. So small and medium scale enterprises provide an opportunity for people to have gainful employment. It provides an opportunity for countries to integrate into the globalized trading system. It provides opportunities for businesses to find new markets for themselves and to adopt new technologies to increase their output. So we're working with employers and workers to ensure that they can be sustainable within cities, in particular zones, or in particular areas that have not yet been fully exploited, maybe in natural goods and services or holistic and herbal medicines and the like. So enterprise development is very important, but many people who may be entrepreneurial just don't have the knowledge on where to go for a loan, how to fill out a bank application, how to do a basic balance sheet. You know, these are basic skills that maybe a lot of the viewers today may say, well, we know all of these things, but many people around the world don't have that training. So by providing opportunities for people to understand what it means to run a business, how to manage that business, it becomes a very important part. Another initiative is on youth employment. I mean, today we see young people who have become disillusioned, and there's a wider group of people who have sort of pushed back against globalization because they don't see that they are benefiting from globalization. They actually see themselves losing. And this is a bit unfortunate because the growth that we have seen over the last 30, 40, even 50 years has shown that globalization actually provides opportunities. Now, there are certain plateaus that we have, and we have to find new ways in order to encourage business to move forward. But young people are always at the low end of that because they're trying to get into the job market. They may have the skills, or maybe employers are saying you don't have the right skills. They may be willing to work, but the jobs are not there, or the salary that they're being offered is not something they like. So they wind up withdrawing from the marketplace. So they don't actually participate in the world of work today. We have a tremendous number of young people who are neither in employment or education. I mean, once they drop out at a very young age, it's hard to bring them back into the business world and to have gainful employment for themselves. So we focus on young people. We focus on initiatives that will help them either be mentored or apprenticed into jobs or look for opportunities for them to be entrepreneurs. So there's lots of opportunities that we need to further explore with countries around the world, given their level of development, to ensure that young people have good opportunities. The last initiative on the decent work agenda, as the 3 examples, is the Alliance 8.7. And that specifically refers to a target which is on reducing or eliminating forced labor, child labor, modern slavery, and human trafficking. Now, when we talk about decent work, this is the objective. This is, you know, we have protection in the workplace, we have good remuneration for ourselves, we have opportunities to have our family benefit from that. But people who are trapped in forced labor or child labor are there not of their own volition, but because they've been tricked into that. They've been trapped into that. They're exploited fully. So that is the antithesis of decent work. So the ILO, with a number of other UN agencies, academics, businesses, and the civil society, are working to eliminate forced labor, child labor, modern slavery, and human trafficking. This takes many different actors to contribute to, but it's a very important initiative. And one initiative within that we're looking at is our Fair Recruitment Initiative. We know that many people who are recruited are given contracts that mean nothing when they land in the country that the job is supposed to be offered. They become vulnerable, they then become susceptible to exploitation. So we're trying to ensure that that recruitment process is transparent, that they're not paying onerous fees to fly-by-night operations, that they're not abused in that travel, that labor migration going from one place to the other. So there are a lot of initiatives that are going on. It requires a lot of support. It requires a great deal of effort and focus by not only governments, but also by civil society organizations. So we're building that up, and we really encourage people to join us for that operation.
And of course, our viewers can go to your website, www.ilo.org, to find out more information about the programs we're talking about today, and some of them we don't get a chance to talk, or won't get a chance to talk about. You were talking about human trafficking, child labor, that type of thing. It seems we're reading more about it today. Is it just that it's becoming more, let's say the media are covering it better than they did before? Is it on the increase? I'm sure some areas where it may be on the increase, some where it's being reduced, but are we making headway in combating these problems? Because they are serious problems, and they've been with us probably since the beginning of time. We just didn't know it, or maybe we ignored it at that point in our lives. But are we making headway on these topics?
Bill, I think we are. You know, most people want to see what's the baseline, right? So we've done a baseline analysis. We see that every year that there are at least 21 million people who are trapped into forced labor. There are 168 million children trapped into child labor. Child labor is basically children who should be in school are unfortunately off to work, which will impact upon them their educational attainment, their moral and physical growth, and they're also sometimes placed into very difficult circumstances. We've seen or heard the stories of the carpet weavers, that only small hands can weave the carpet. We've seen the soccer ball situation. We've seen sneakers or other athletic gear being made by children. You know, you can't blame either side. I think you have to find out what the problem is. So, for example, if children don't have education for themselves, or they don't have opportunities for education, or the education is so poor that it won't lead to a good job for themselves, parents will make that decision. Instead of spending all the money on an education which won't be valuable, rather the child go out and do some work to bring some money home so that we won't starve. I mean, it's a very practical consideration. So we have the progressive elimination of child labor, but you have to put in place social protection measures that, for example, providing funds to poor families so that their kids could make that, or the parents make the decision their children go to school rather than out to the fields and farm or into the mines and mining for elements that are in everyday products. You know, our mobile phones, our laptops. You know, we have coal chain in there, and that's in its raw form. It is a radioactive element that children, when they're exposed to that, and they're exposed with their bare hands because they're not trained, they're exposed to those hazards, it shortens their life. Women who are working amongst pesticides, young women, or working in the kilns, the brick kilns, or working in mining. So all of these elements, yes, it does put food on the table for now, but what about the growth of the country? What about the opportunities for the family? They'll be mired in that cycle of poverty and exclusion, which unfortunately doesn't move the country forward. So it's very important that we realize that, you know, child labor and human trafficking is a denigration of the human spirit, is the loss of dignity for an individual, but also a lack of social and economic growth within that particular country. So yes, it's out there. We've done the analysis. $151 billion is being made every year. This would make it something like the 68th largest country in the world if it was an economy in of itself. So there's a great deal of incentive for people to exploit others. But this is why the ILO and the UN system itself is a human rights-based institution, because we base our standards on those human rights. And with that, the individual has to have that dignity, at least within the workplace, as we see.
You've laid out a litany of really important areas and many problematic areas too that we've dealt with in the past and we'll be dealing with in the future. Hardest question, the last 30 seconds we have, what is the number one challenge confronting the International Labor Organization as you move forward?
I think one of the things that I'm very seized by these days is the future of work. It happens to also be an initiative of the ILO's Director General, Guy Ryder, on the anniversary of our 100th centenary. that there are 7 initiatives, and the sort of pinnacle of all that is the future of work. People are seeing automation, they're seeing robotics, they are seeing their jobs being taken away by machinery, by algorithms. I think that there were a number of pundits who have said that, you know, most of the stock traders on Wall Street will lose their jobs in the next few years because you have algorithms that can do all the analysis for them. So it's not just about physical manual work. It's not just about repetitive tasks in factories. This is about higher level people, and everybody is exposed to that. So how do we provide good opportunities for people in the future so that there is aggregate demand? Because without demand, there are no goods and services being sold.
That's for sure. We're going to have to come back and do a whole show on that, Kevin. It is so important. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much, Bill.
Okay. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.